Throughout history, mysterious disappearances have captivated audiences. However, few tales are as frightening and freaky as that of Michael Rockefeller, member of the legendary Rockefeller family and grandson to John D. Rockefeller Jr. Michael Rockefeller vanished without a trace in the heart of the uncharted Asmat region in Papua New Guinea during an expedition. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance, the Asmat tribe, and the eerie found footage left investigators and armchair sleuths alike scratching their heads until now. In 1969, an adventure magazine reporter named Milt Macklin recorded footage to include in his documentary about Rockefeller's disappearance. 40 years later, this footage was reviewed and it was discovered that something incredible was in the footage that no one had ever seen before. I'm going to tell you the story of Michael Rockefeller, what was discovered on the footage, and the truth behind Michael's disappearance. Before the rest of the episode, remember, if you enjoy Freaky What content, click the freaky liker button shaped like a hand. Subscribe to the channel and click the content alarm bell so you know when your favorite freaky content is uploaded. Okay, let's get back to it. Nestled in the heart of the dense Papua New Guinea rainforest, the Asmat tribe has long remained an enigma to the outside world. Famed for their intricate wood carvings and fearsome headhunting practices, the Asmat people offered a tantalizing glimpse into a culture that was both captivating and mysterious. Michael Rockefeller, a Harvard graduate and heir to one of America's most powerful families, was lured by the call of anthropological exploration to the remote corners of the earth. He was interested in learning the culture and studying this tribe, and he had the means to do it. Michael fell in love with the people in the tribes of New Guinea on previous expeditions and even tried to barter with one of the tribes for what he considered to be tribal art. In fact, after Michael attended a previous expedition with fellow students from Harvard, he decided to stay and become well-versed in the culture of the Asmat tribe, so much that his father, Nelson Rockefeller, opened up a museum in New York called the Museum of Primitive Art to display art from places like New Guinea. One example of this art is the Asmat bizpole. A bizpole is carved from a single mangrove tree. The Asmat tribe believe that the spirits of the dead stay among the living until their deaths are avenged. Bizpoles, or ancestor spirit poles, are made to hold the spirits of the recently deceased and keep them away from the village. They carve these poles and they are beautiful expressions of their sacred ancestors. Americans might look at them as art. The tribes don't consider these to be art, as it is a deep part of their culture, and they are considered sacred. Michael loved the look and artistic expression of the bizpole, and he had negotiated a trade of some goods from America in exchange for one of these bizpoles. The problem was the tribe had not kept up their end of the bargain. Michael had plans to go to the Asmat tribe on this trip and come home with his bizpole. Michael also teamed up with a Dutch anthropologist named René Wassing to begin to travel and collect unique art pieces from all over the world and bring them back to his father's museum in New York. On Saturday, November 18th, 1961, the ambitious young 23-year-old Michael Rockefeller attempted to continue his expedition to study the Asmat people, aiming to add to the world's knowledge of this ancient tribe. His boat was approaching a rough patch of sea where the Betsjay River poured out into the Arafura Sea and caused large waves. As Michael, René Wassing, a Dutch anthropologist, and two local guides, Simon and Leo, traveled by these hand-carved canoes that were tied together to form a catamaran over the Arafura Sea, waves began splashing over the sides of the boats, and they began to fill with water. The crew was unable to move the catamaran, and it was sinking faster and faster. As Michael and his crew were now stranded in shark and crocodile-infested waters, trying to figure out what to do, the two guides offered to swim for help and immediately left Michael and René as they began swimming towards the shore. The boat was approximately 5 nautical miles from the shore, where several coastal villages in South New Guinea were, and land was barely visible. Suddenly, a wave slammed into the catamaran and flipped it completely over. Michael grabbed a floating gas can, called a jerry can, and tied it onto his belt to help him float. Michael, feeling frustrated, turned to René and said, "I think I can make it." René argued that the tide was against him and he wouldn't be able to make it, but Michael didn't listen and began swimming toward the shore anyway. Around 12 hours later, René Wassing was rescued by a boat sent by Dutch authorities. René immediately asked if Michael Rockefeller had made it to land or had been heard from. The boat captain said that they were contacted by 2 local guides and that Michael had not been heard from. Authorities immediately began searching for Michael Rockefeller. The Rockefeller family initiated one of the largest searches in history. The Dutch governor sent boats, planes, Marines, and police units out in order to find Michael. 5,000 locals searched through the swamps along the coast in search of Michael. Australian and Dutch aircraft visually scanned the coastline. The U.S. 7th Fleet even began looking after receiving a telegram from President John F. Kennedy wanting to help. Michael's concerned father, Governor Nelson Rockefeller of New York, and Michael's twin sister, Mary, were already on location with a group of journalists in Morocco in order to assist with the search and rescue operations for Michael. Three years after the search for Michael Rockefeller began, his father, Nelson Rockefeller, released a statement on behalf of the Rockefeller family that said they believed Michael Rockefeller was now deceased. Finally, after 3 years of searching for their beloved son, the Rockefeller family began to grieve. Michael's sister, Mary, wrote a book entitled When Grief Calls Forth the Healing, a memoir of losing a twin. Things began to get back to normal, and life continued on for the Rockefeller family. Across the sea in New Guinea, local people and local tribes began telling the stories of the missing wealthy American, and many people understood more than anyone else in the world what really happened to Michael Rockefeller. In 1969, 5 years after Michael Rockefeller was declared dead by his family, rumor began to spread that a source from Australia who had been on an expedition near the villages on the shore where Michael had vanished had seen Michael Rockefeller in the jungles around one of these villages. Milt Macklin, a reporter for Adventure magazine, took this tip and decided to take action and see if this rumor was true. Milt did research and found out the exact area where this person supposedly saw Michael. He was followed everywhere he went by a film crew to capture every moment, hoping that they would find Michael Rockefeller. After many weeks of looking for Michael, intense searching, and speaking with local tribes, Milt and the film crew returned with no sign of Michael in the jungles of New Guinea. Upon his return, Milt Macklin compiled all of the information he collected and began telling the story of his expedition. He even wrote a best-selling book entitled The Search for Michael Rockefeller. The film crew that followed Milt around turned in all of the footage they captured and put it in storage in case Milt Macklin wanted to use it for any projects. Milt decided since he hadn't found Michael and he wrote his book, he wouldn't pursue creating any more projects about this subject, so he never reviewed any of the footage of his search for Michael Rockefeller. "40 years after Milt Macklin stored his footage, a filmmaker interested in creating a documentary on Michael Rockefeller decided to review the footage to see if there was any information or video that he could use in his documentary. Shockingly, his team discovered something that would take the world by storm. In one of the videos, hundreds of Asmat warriors could be seen rowing down a river and shooting arrows in an Asmat tribal war ceremony. In the middle of the video team saw a Caucasian male, stark naked with a beard, in amongst the tribal warriors. He not only stood out, he looked very familiar. It appeared to be Michael Rockefeller. Immediately, people began talking about how at the time the footage was taken, Michael was still alive and living as a tribesman amongst the people of the Asmat tribe. It appeared that he wanted to escape the grand life of the wealthy Rockefellers and live a simple life as a tribesman. This rumor quickly spread, and many people believed this is what happened. A few years later, a National Geographic editor and best-selling author named Carl Hoffman decided to get to the bottom of what really happened to Michael Rockefeller. In an interview, Hoffman said, "I became aware of Rockefeller in my 20s, and his story never left me." Hoffman says, "He just disappeared into myth, leaving many unanswered questions. I thought I'd go into this alien world and discover the truth of what really took place." Hoffman went to New Guinea on a mission to live amongst the Asmat people, build trust, and learn the truth. After many weeks of earning their trust, Hoffman began asking and hearing stories. Every story he heard matched the other stories from the tribe and seemed to paint a vivid picture of the final moments of Michael Rockefeller. The people were reluctant and warned Carl that he could not tell anyone what they said. Every time he heard a piece of the story, he was warned that telling anyone the truth could mean death for them and possibly death for him. Carl did not heed the warning. Upon returning to the U.S., he wrote a book that contained the truths told to him about what really happened to Michael Rockefeller. And I'm going to let you know what he said right now. On Saturday, November 18th, 1961, 3 Asmat tribal elders named Ajim, Fin, and Pep were standing amongst other men on 8 canoes near the mouth of the Betj River. The group of tribal men were relaxing on their canoes, smoking hand-wrapped cigars and taking time to rest after a long day of hunting. Suddenly, Ajim spoke up and pointed out an odd, white-looking creature in the crashing waves ahead. It appeared to be some type of snake or crocodile, and Ajim wanted all of the men to be aware. The Asmat men began rowing and making their way toward the opening of this river where the creature was swimming, preparing for anything as they did not know what it was. The men prepared to attack, and some of them raised their spears as they got closer. Finally, as the creature came into sight, the men put down their spears and began to laugh when they saw a white man floating on his back with funny clothes on and tied to a floating red can. Michael rolled over, saw the tribal men, and a sigh of relief came over his face. He then reached up to grab one of the canoes. The elders began analyzing the situation. Pep needed confirmation on the situation, so he looked at the other 2 elders, Ajim and Fin, until they all shook their heads in agreement. Pep then looked back down at Michael and pulled him into the canoe. Michael laid back from exhaustion and closed his eyes to try and get some strength back. He was happy to finally be safe. Michael sat up and noticed the men were canoeing toward land. Assuming they were taking him to the tribe, he began asking if they could help him get assistance for Renee, who was still at the boat. However, the language barrier was very strong, and the men began chanting. While the men chanted some kind of ritualistic sounding chant, Michael noticed they were beaching the canoes in an area that was far from the tribe. In fact, it looked very remote, and the only thing visible was a large open area inside of many trees. All of a sudden, one of the men from the Asmat tribe began laughing hysterically and pointing at Michael. The entire group of men then began laughing out loud and pointing. Some of the men seemed to be making fun of Michael while they laughed. Michael didn't know what to do. The men suddenly stopped laughing and began chanting in a rhythmic style once again. Suddenly, the Asmat man who started the laughing approached Michael slowly. Michael laid down in the canoe in the opposite direction of the approaching man. As he completely laid down and reached the end of the canoe, the tribesmen took a stance directly over Michael and started smiling. Then he lifted his spear and pierced it deep into Michael's side. Michael screamed in pain and held his side in agony. The tribesman then lifted his spear again as Michael rolled over and drove it into Michael's other side. Trying to escape this nightmare, and while in agonizing pain, Michael reached for the side of the canoe and was able to throw his leg over the side and then roll out onto the mud. He tried his best to stand, but fumbled in agony as he tried to get away from these men. Then 2 tribesmen grabbed him under the arms and carried him to the center of the opening in the trees. As they carried Michael, the chanting got louder and louder. Then other tribesmen began blowing on horns periodically. The men positioned Michael in the middle of the clearing, put him on his knees, and then backed away. Michael, struggling to stay upright, was holding his sides and in immense pain. a young tribesman approached Michael slowly from the side. Then he swiftly grabbed his hair, pulling his head forward and down. Then another man approached from behind. This man was carrying an axe. He raised the axe and with all of his strength brought it down on the back of Michael's neck. As it turns out, the Asmat tribe remembered a young, pretentious white man from the U.S. who wanted to take one of their sacred and traditional biz poles in exchange for some superficial goods from America. This attempt at bartering by Michael was very offensive to the Asmat tribe, and this was the reason they never sent the biz pole to Michael to hold up their end of the deal. When Michael floated up to their canoe, the Asmat tribe took it as a sign that killing this young man that offended their people would avenge some of the spirits in their tribe and would free these spirits. The hatred for Michael turned out to be the motivating factor in killing him in this unfortunate event of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. After killing Michael Rockefeller, the Asmat tribe cut up his body and cooked and ate his flesh. His brain was considered the most important part of his body and was reserved to be eaten by the three elders, Ajim, Finn, and Pep. Michael's skull ended up in the hut of the elder Finn, where it was treated like a special token or trophy, being painted and decorated often. The Asmat tribe swore every member to secrecy so that this rich American family would never seek revenge. To this day, many quote-unquote authorities refuse to believe Carl Hoffman's account of what the Asmat people told him. Instead, they insist that Michael drowned while trying to swim to shore, even though no body or sign of him was ever recovered. What do you believe happened to Michael Rockefeller? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this freaky episode, like the video, subscribe, and please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.